The call came at 4:47 inches the morning. I know the exact time, because I had just looked at my phone to check on my husband Daniel, who had been driving back from a work site in Barrie. He was 2 hours late, and I'd been sitting on the edge of our bed, in our little townhouse in Guelph, telling myself he probably stopped for coffee, probably lost track of time, probably everything was fine. It wasn't fine. The voice on the other end was calm, in the way that people are trained to be calm when they're delivering news that will split someone's life into a before and an after. She told me there had been a collision on Highway 400. Black ice. A transport truck. She asked if I was the wife of Daniel Reeves. I said yes before she finished the sentence. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. I was 31 years old, 26 weeks pregnant, and I had just become a widow in the time it takes to say a name. I don't remember driving to the hospital. I don't remember who called my sister or how she got there, but she was in the waiting room when I arrived, and she held my hands while a doctor explained what had happened. I remember the fluorescent lights. I remember the sound of the vending machine humming at the end of the corridor. I remember thinking that Daniel had promised to paint the nursery that weekend. We had the paint cans sitting in the garage. A soft green he had picked out himself, holding up the swatches with the same focus he gave to everything. I never got to tell him we weren't going to need that paint. 3 days after Daniel died, my body went into labor. 26 weeks. The doctors called it stress-induced preterm labor, though I think my body simply had no more room to hold everything at once. Our daughter, Mia, was born weighing 1 pound and 14 ounces. She was the size of a bag of sugar. She had Daniel's nose and my stubbornness, the nurses would later tell me, because she fought from the very first hour. She was taken immediately to the NICU at McMaster Children's Hospital in Hamilton. I was handed a pamphlet about grief counseling with one hand and a document about NICU costs with the other. In Ontario, OHIP covers the medical procedures themselves, but the costs surrounding a long-term NICU stay accumulate in ways no one explains to you ahead of time. Parking at $7 an hour, every single day. The hotel-style family residence attached to the hospital. Because we didn't live in Hamilton, and I could not drive 40 minutes each way, while my daughter might stop breathing. Specialized formula when my own milk supply collapsed from the shock. The medical equipment I would eventually need at home for her discharge. A private consultation with a developmental specialist that the system wait time made impossible to access fast enough. And the debt Daniel and I had already been carrying: our mortgage, his truck payment, a line of credit we had opened to cover the renovation on the house we had bought 18 months earlier, full of plans. The number that kept coming back to me was $42,000. That was what I calculated, sitting in the family lounge of the NICU with a cold cup of Tim Hortons coffee and a notebook, trying to put math to a situation that math couldn't fully hold. That was the gap. What we owed, what was coming, what I could not cover on my own with Daniel's life insurance still weeks away from processing. $42,000. I called my parents on a Tuesday morning. They live in Victoria, British Columbia, my mother and father, retired, in the house they moved to 6 years ago, for the mild weather and the slower pace. They are not wealthy in any extravagant sense, but they are comfortable. My father had worked in project management for the province for over 30 years. My mother had been a dental hygienist. They had RRSPs and a paid-off home and a boat they took out every summer on the inner harbor. I told my mother everything. I told her about Mia, about the tubes and the monitors and the tiny isolette where our daughter lived under warming lights. I told her about the debt. I told her I was not asking for a gift. I told her it was a loan, that I would pay back every cent as Daniel's estate cleared, as life insurance processed, as things stabilized. I just needed a bridge. I just needed someone to help me hold the weight for a little while. My mother was quiet for a long moment. Then she told me she was sorry. She told me she loved me. And then she told me that she and my father were leaving for a river cruise through Portugal and Spain in 4 days, and that the timing was just very difficult. I thought I had misheard her. I asked her to repeat it. She explained that they had booked the cruise 14 months earlier, that the deposit was non-refundable, that they had been looking forward to it for over a year, that travel insurance wouldn't cover a cancellation for this reason. that they had already arranged for a neighbor to take their mail. I asked her, "Mom, your granddaughter is in the NICU. I'm asking you for a loan." She said she understood, but that they simply weren't in a position to pull that kind of money on such short notice. She said the funds were tied up. $42,000. Tied up. For people with a paid-off home, a boat, and a 3-week cruise already booked. I called my father directly after. I thought maybe my mother had softened the situation, cushioned it, maybe he didn't fully understand. My father listened to me the same way he used to listen when I was a teenager asking for an extension on curfew. Patiently. Slightly removed. He told me they really wanted to help, but that the timing was genuinely complicated. He suggested I look into government assistance programs. He mentioned that employment insurance had a special benefits component for new parents. He said the hospital social workers were trained for exactly this situation. He was not wrong about any of those things. He was also my father, and his daughter had just lost her husband, and his granddaughter was fighting to breathe inside a plastic box, and he was getting on a plane to Lisbon in 4 days. I called my older brother next. Marcus is 40, 3 years older than me, and lives in Calgary where he works in oil and gas. We have always had a functional relationship, not close in the confiding your secrets way, but steady. He remembered Mia's due date. He sent Daniel a nice message when we announced the pregnancy. Marcus picked up on the second ring. I explained everything again. My voice was steadier the third time through because I had already cried everything out with my mother, and there was nothing left to cry with. Marcus listened. He asked a few practical questions. Then he said something I have turned over in my mind many times since. He said, "Look, I know this is brutal, and I'm sorry. But maybe start with Daniel's parents. They're closer to the situation. They're grieving him too. It makes more sense for them to step in." Then he said he had to get back to a meeting. That was it. Not no, not yes. Just a redirection towards someone else. I want to be careful here, because I have thought about this a great deal in the years since, and I don't think any one of them is a monster. I don't think my mother is evil. I don't think my father is cruel. I don't think my brother is heartless. I think they are people who, when faced with a situation that required them to inconvenience themselves, in a meaningful way, chose not to. I think they found their reasons, and they held on to them, and they boarded that plane, and they clinked glasses somewhere over the Atlantic, while my daughter lay in a hospital in Hamilton, learning how to breathe. That choice, the smallness of it, in the face of what I was carrying, is something I have never been able to set down. As it turned out, Daniel's parents came through. His mother, Patricia, drove from Sudbury to Hamilton the same week I called. She didn't ask questions about timelines or repayment structures. She transferred $20,000 into my account within 48 hours and told me to call her if I needed more. His father started making phone calls to Daniel's employer about the group life insurance, to a family lawyer about the estate, to a financial advisor about bridging the gap. They were in their late 60s, and they had just lost their son, and they showed up in every way my own family did not. I never told my parents that Daniel's family had helped. I let them believe I had sorted it out through the programs my father had recommended. I don't know exactly why. Maybe I didn't have the energy for that conversation. Maybe I knew that hearing it worked out would undo something in me completely. Mia came home after 111 days in the NICU. She was 4 pounds, 3 ounces, and she had a full head of dark hair. And she screamed the entire drive home, which the doctor had told me was a very good sign. I had the car seat positioned wrong twice, and had to ask a nurse to help me adjust it. I cried in the parking garage, where no one could see me. I sent my parents a photo. My mother responded with a heart emoji and wrote that Mia was beautiful. My father wrote wonderful news. My brother sent a gift card to Indigo. I stopped calling after that. Not dramatically. Not with a speech or a letter. I just stopped initiating. When they called, which became less frequent, I was polite, but brief. My answers got shorter. The distance between us grew in the way that distances grow when no one is actively fighting to close them quietly, steadily, until one day you realize you can't quite remember the last real conversation you had. Mia turned 2, then 3, then 4. She learned to walk, to talk, to insist on wearing her rain boots even on dry days. She had Daniel's expressions and his laugh. She started asking questions about him, and I answered them carefully and honestly, the way the grief counselor had guided me to. She knew her father was someone who loved her very much before he ever got to meet her. She knew her maternal grandparents existed the way you know a distant country exists somewhere real but not quite part of your daily world. And then, on a Wednesday afternoon in October, my brother called. I almost didn't pick up. It had been 11 months since we had spoken, and that conversation had been brief and perfunctory. A birthday acknowledgement, pleasantries, nothing. But I answered. He said, "I have to tell you something about Mom and Dad." They had both passed. My mother in August, from a cardiac event that came with very little warning. My father 6 weeks later. The doctors called it broken heart syndrome, though I'm not sure I believe the heart is that tidy about its reasons. They had died within weeks of each other, after nearly 40 years of marriage. I sat down on my kitchen floor. Not because I was devastated in the way I had been devastated by Daniel. That grief had been a rupture. This was something older and more complicated. The grief of a relationship that had already been quietly ending for years. The grief of a door that would now never open again. Of words I had half formed and never said. I asked Marcus why he hadn't called me when our mother died. He said he had wanted to give me time to process before getting into the other stuff. I asked what the other stuff was. He told me our parents' estate was larger than either of us had known. The Victoria house had nearly doubled in value since they purchased it. There were investments, a substantial savings portfolio, the boat, furnishings, a small piece of property outside of Nanaimo they had bought years ago and never mentioned. The total, after preliminary assessment, was somewhere between $1.1 and $1.3 million. I sat with that number for a moment. More than $1 million. And they had told me, with 4 days' notice and $42,000 standing between me and collapse, that the money was tied up. Marcus said a lawyer had been in contact with him. There was a will. He wanted to discuss it before I engaged with the estate process on my own. We met in person 6 weeks later, in a coffee shop in Toronto. Marcus had flown in from Calgary. He arrived with a folder of documents and the particular manner of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say. He told me our parents had left the estate primarily to him. Not entirely. I was to receive a sum. He slid a piece of paper across the table that represented what our parents had described in the will as an equal acknowledgement, which is a phrase designed to sound generous while meaning something else entirely. The number was $45,000. Out of more than $1 million. $45,000. He told me there was language in the will about how I had chosen distance in the final years of their lives. That I had reduced contact. That the distribution reflected the relationship each child had maintained with the family. I read the words twice. Then I folded the piece of paper and put it in my bag. I told Marcus I needed time to think. He seemed relieved. He said he thought that was very mature. He said he hoped we could handle this as a family, without lawyers making it complicated. He said he wanted to preserve the relationship. I drove home, and I put Mia to bed, and I sat at my kitchen table until past midnight. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, measured, apologetic, not unkind, telling me the money was tied up while she packed her suitcase for Portugal. I thought about my father suggesting OHIP programs and hospital social workers. I thought about Marcus saying to call Daniel's family because they were closer to the situation. I thought about Patricia driving 4 hours to Hamilton without being asked. I thought about the will and the phrase, chosen distance, written by people who had chosen first. I contacted an estate lawyer the following week. She is a woman named Andrea, and she has short gray hair, and the particular calm of someone who has spent 20 years watching families reveal themselves through money. She reviewed the will and the documents Marcus had provided. She asked me detailed questions about the years of reduced contact who initiated it, what the pattern looked like, whether there had been explicit estrangement or simply fading communication. I told her everything. Andrea told me that in Ontario, the Succession Law Reform Act does not entitle adult children to a mandatory share of a parent's estate, the way some jurisdictions do. Parents in this province have the legal right to distribute as they choose. However, she told me that a will can be challenged on several grounds, and that the specific language used to justify the unequal distribution, citing a chosen distance that the challenger can demonstrate was a response to the family's own conduct, creates an arguable narrative that some courts have found relevant in assessing testamentary intent. She did not promise me anything. She told me what the process would look like. She told me how long it could take. She asked me why I wanted to pursue it. I told her, "It is not about the money in the way people assume it's about the money. I have rebuilt my life. I have a good job, a stable home, a daughter who is healthy and thriving. I am not pursuing this because I need the funds to survive. I am pursuing this because my parents wrote a story about me in the last document they ever created, and that story is not true. They wrote that I chose distance. They did not write that I called from a hospital corridor and was told about a cruise itinerary. They did not write about the $42,000, or the 111 days, or the parking fees, or the family residence at McMaster, or the gift card from Indigo. They wrote the ending without including the beginning. And my daughter will one day be old enough to ask questions about all of it. I want there to be a record that tells the full truth. The process is ongoing. Marcus has retained his own lawyer, which doesn't surprise me. The person I spoke to 3 years ago over coffee, the one who said he hoped we could handle this as a family, has become someone I communicate with only through legal correspondence. I don't know if that makes me sad or simply tired. What I know is this. There is a particular loneliness in being failed by your family during the worst moment of your life, and there is a different, quieter loneliness in watching them not fully understand what they did. My parents went on that cruise and came home with photographs and stories and probably a bottle of port. I don't think they lay awake over it. I don't think they fully registered, even years later, the weight of what they had decided in the middle of a Tuesday morning phone call. That's the thing about being the person left behind in those moments. You carry the whole of it. They get to put it down. Mia asked me last spring, while we were walking along the trail near our house, why she didn't see Grandma and Grandpa on my side like her friends saw their grandparents. She had just turned 5. She asked in the direct, unguarded way that children ask things that take adults years to approach. I told her that sometimes families are complicated, and that the people who love us best are not always the people we expect. I told her about Patricia, who she calls Grandma Patty, who visits twice a year and takes her to see the trains at the Science Center. I told her that love shows up in the people who show up. She thought about that for a moment, stepping carefully around a puddle on the path. Then she said, "Grandma Patty always comes." Yes, she does. I don't know yet how the legal process will resolve. Andrea has prepared a strong challenge based on the documented history, and the opposing counsel has responded with arguments about testamentary freedom that are technically valid, and also, I think, beside the point. The point is not whether my parents had the right to do what they did. The point is what it means when they did it, and what the record should reflect. Whatever happens, I have made my peace with the version of events that is mine to carry. I made my peace with it somewhere around Mia's 3rd birthday, when I watched her blow out candles and make a wish she wouldn't tell me, and I realized that every decision I had made in the worst year of my life, every phone call, every loan I accepted from the right people, every moment I kept going, when I could have stopped had brought me to this kitchen, this cake, this child. I am not someone who believes that things happen for a reason. I think that's a story we tell to make chaos livable. But I do believe that what people do when it costs them something is the only true measure of who they are. I believe that character is not declared, it is demonstrated. And I believe that the people who showed up for me, Patricia driving through October rain, Andrea listening without judgment, the NICU nurse, who held my hand on the nights I came apart, those people told me something true about the world. It isn't the story I would have written for myself, but it is mine, and I intend to make sure the ending is honest.